Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series, the podcast that celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Dom Francks is our guest today. Dom is a wilderness guide and leadership coach. He founded VIVIFY, a wilderness-based coaching program built around a week-long backpacking trip in the High Sierra, other epic locations. Dom, it's a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series. Welcome.
Yeah, awesome to be with you, Howard. Thanks so much for having me.
Fantastic. When I saw your profile on Podmatch, which is one of the services podcasters use and guests use to either be a guest on a podcast or to find a guest, you cross two paths of my world, the coaching world and let's just say the outdoor world. I think you're a little bit more extreme than I am, but we'll talk about that. But I am excited to have you share this insight and experience about the confluence between coaching and that world and the wilderness. So if you could, for our listeners, just give us a little bit of a background of who you are. How'd you get into this space?
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in Washington State and grew up spending a lot of time outside. My family were avid campers, I would say. And I had a really powerful or really intense experience when I was in sixth grade that really woke me up to the realities of climate change and our ecological crises and sort of the combination of growing up, spending a lot of time outside, and then also seeing the impact that we were having on these natural spaces that I love so much really, motivated me to want to do something meaningful in service of preserving and conserving those spaces. So I graduated from college, Stanford University, with an engineering degree, which it's very obvious that you would go work for a startup. And so
Right.
I was working as a software engineer at a solar company, but just started to feel really frustrated with sitting behind a desk all day. It was sort of like I could see down the barrel of the next 30 or 40 years. And I was like, I'm a reasonably good software engineer, but I don't really feel excited about doing this for the rest of my life. And so I took some time away from that and ended up doing a month-long wilderness education course with Knowles, which is the National Outdoor Leadership School in the North Cascades, and just fell totally in love with wilderness education. And so since then, essentially, I've had parallel careers working both at climate-focused tech companies. I've been the chief of staff for a regenerative agriculture company. I've been the head of product for a solar finance company based in Mexico, strangely enough. But I've also been building a parallel career as a wilderness guide. And so I was an Outward Bound instructor. I've guided in Patagonia and in Alaska. And then through some other lenses of my own personal exploration and work, I've also been doing leadership coaching for 3 years now, and can talk a little bit more about my training there. But that feels like it really bridges between my work in the wilderness and my work in more climate-focused companies. And so, as you mentioned, now I'm full-time working on VIVIFY, which is a wilderness-based coaching program. And I can talk more about the intersection of wilderness experiences and coaching, but I'll just stop there. That's a little bit about my
Sure.
background.
No, I appreciate it. And what you shared prompted a number of questions, but I do want to go first back to your very young age. You said 6 years old, I
Mm.
believe, and there was an event that affected you. You're in Washington State. I can guess what that event might be, but I'm trying to figure out what your age is. You don't have to share it if you don't want, but what was that event? If you'd share that with us.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if this is what you're thinking of, but when I was 6, there was a big earthquake in Washington. Not something that necessarily alerted me to climate change, but I do remember that being a very notable event. No, what I'm referring to there is actually when I was in 6th grade. So when I was 11 or
Sixth grade.
so,
Okay.
they showed us the movie An Inconvenient Truth in science
Okay.
class, which was the
Al
original climate
Al Gore.
change documentary with Al Gore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that movie scared me so badly that I fainted.
Oh,
I
wow.
lost consciousness in the classroom and woke up on the floor of the classroom.
Yeah.
And essentially what I was experiencing was it felt like the rug being pulled out from under my understanding of what the world was. I thought the adults mostly had it under control. And this was essentially an experience that was showing me like, no, they don't. And, the business as usual of the world that I grew up in is not going to be able to continue, was like more or
Mhm.
less what my experience was of watching that movie. And, I remember my dad picking me up from school and I was like, "Dad, did you know about this? Did you know about climate change?" And he said, "Yes." And then he said something that really stuck with me where he was like, if it's that meaningful to you, if you care about it that much, then you should do something about it when you grow up." And like that moment really, really stuck with me.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I think we've learned a bit about how to communicate about climate change since then, and probably like terrifying people is not the way to get them to change, but it worked for me.
Yeah, and I can think about you in that moment. Th There's a lot of I don't know if it's I think it's empathy. It's having being overly empathetic, and not in a bad way, but it's like all of a sudden we're faced with something and we just feel really bad about it, and what do we do? And good thing your dad, you had a nice conversation. It's like, now you get to do something about it. Um Going into engineering, and by the way, I can appreciate that story as well. There's nothing worse than feeling like I'm gonna do something for the rest of my life that I don't wanna do, or I like what I do, but I can't see doing it for the rest of my life. That's how I got into coaching. How did you begin to you have these outdoor experiences, Patagonia, other wilderness areas, these leadership courses. Was this always this desire to get more immersed in the world of the outdoors, or is that just something logical, just kind of built layer upon layer, or was there an event there as well?
I'd say that was more gradual. I mean, so like I said, I grew up spending a lot of time camping. I
Mhm.
then this is like a little bit is related to my story, but a little bit of a tangent. I spent about a decade trying to become a professional golfer, and so I played
Stanford.
golf at Stanford. Like I think three or four of the guys that I played with are now on the PGA Tour. So like that possibility was a very real thing. Like there is absolutely sort of another timeline where I could be a professional golfer. Um, Apologies. Hopefully, if you can edit this out, that'd be great, but I just got a phone call.
No
Um,
worries.
cool.
Okay, let's go. Three,
Alright, you
two,
still got
one.
me?
Yeah, I still got you. All right.
Beautiful. Yeah, so being a professional golfer was something that was really in play and could have been a reality.
Right.
Um, but it also took me away from the outdoors.
Mm,
So, I then when believe this was right when I was in college. I went and did this mountaineering trip with my dad and some family friends on Mount Shuckson in Washington.
mm,
And like I remember the first time I tied into a rope on a glacier, I was like, "This is the coolest thing ever. I want to do more of this." And then a few years later, when I was taking some time away from my career, I just wanted to do more of that. So
mm,
I did a mountaineering course with Knowles, but I also had this curiosity about what it might be to be an outdoor educator, and that
mhm,
month-long course just there's a difference between just, like, being on a trip with family and being on, like, an expedition with the intention of, like, creating transformation or learning, and that's what I really learned with Knowles. And
mhm,
then I spent a couple of years working for Outward Bound, which is another outdoor education organization, and also for Chulengo expeditions in Patagonia and Alaska. And that was really more focused on, yeah, what you would call outdoor education. So we were bringing people from ages of like 12 to 40 out into the wilderness, but it was really more about like discovering leadership, learning things about conservation. There wasn't really like a spiritual element to it.
mhm,
And then I did a year-long program with this organization called the Animus Valley Institute, which is run by
mm,
someone named Bill Plotkin, who has
mhm,
written 4 or 5 books now on our psycho-spiritual relationship to the natural world. And
mm,
that experience was like another layer deeper of connection with the wild and sort of integrating a lot of the questions I'd been asking myself about what is a good life? Why is it
mhm,
so challenging for me to find work that feels both impactful and personally sustainable?
mhm,
And the tools that I learned through my work with Animus Valley to ask those questions have been really powerful. And that's sort of what launched this latest iteration of Vivify, where I feel like the aliveness and clarity that we feel when we're in an intentional setting in the wilderness has such
Mhm.
powerful applications for helping us live better lives.
Okay. Now, I'm gonna do again what I did with going back to your youth, so I won't make the mistake of going back to 6 years old. I now know it was 6th grade, but there was something about the being the captain of the golf team at Stanford, and the word that was coming to mind was the word mindset. Because in order to be a golfer, a professional level golfer or amateur level golfer, not like the me who goes out and shoots a really bad score, before you go up to the tee, there's a lot of things you're going in your head to prepare you for the moment you get up to the tee and hit the ball. And so I'm really curious when as we start to transition into Vivify and the work you're doing with your clientele, is where does the development or the rebuilding, the evolution of your client's mindset come in? Because we need mindset for a lot of things, everything for that matter. So how have you, with this program you've developed with Vivify and working with leaders, whatever age, gender, how do you help them integrate into this world to get up away from the PC and go explore and be with nature? And where's mindset play a role in that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot about the way that my golf career has impacted the way that I navigate the world now. So I appreciate the question. I'd say there's two main lenses here. So I run wilderness based coaching programs. So it's both integrated and there's sort of two aspects there. There's like the wilderness experience and then there's the coaching piece. And I think there's two sort of different but very complementary mindsets that are
Mm,
incorporated in both of those. So I'll start with the coaching piece, which is I've done a lot of work with the Conscious Leadership Group. They wrote a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which I think is just a phenomenal like operating manual for how to navigate through the world. And that book at its core is oriented towards moving from a sort of to me mindset to a by me mindset,
mm,
or a mindset of being like at the effect of the world or creating your own experience and creating your own reality. And there's a ton of tools that I use and that is incorporated in that body of work. But foundationally, I think the mindset that's most helpful is like I can create many of the circumstances of my life, and essentially, life is in some sense just an infinite game to continue to be played. And like, what is the next play? Rather than getting a little bit more focused on like, I'm at the effect of the world. All these things are happening to me, and I just have to like navigate through this scary world and figure out how to continue to be right. Um, the only thing I'll say to clarify that is that there absolutely are real victims in the world, but
mm,
I find that most of the people that I end up speaking to, and maybe many of the people in our sort of shared orbit, are often experiencing themselves as victims in circumstances where they actually have a lot more control than they think they have. So I think it's a very helpful mindset reframe. And then the wilderness mindset piece, I think can best be described as some combination of belonging or an orientation to the world as animate. And what I mean by that is experiencing the natural world as if like the other beings, and whether it's trees, the wind, rocks, like these other forces have agency, have their own experience, and have a spirit. And I actually think the question of what does the world look like from this perspective, from this mindset, is much more interesting to me than the question of is this foundationally true?
mm.
Now, I think it is foundationally true, largely because 99% of our ancestors for 99% of human history across the entire world saw the world this way. We're the weird ones. But regardless of whether or not you want to like believe that or not, just walking through the wilderness with a mindset of like, wow, what is my experience like if I envision that I'm part of a community out here, if I'm in a metropolis rather than a wasteland that doesn't have any other conscious beings? So, yeah, the mindset of like being a creator of your life and also being part of the family of beings when in the wild. I think those are two key mindsets that I weave throughout my work.
I love it. I'm curious, who are your ideal clients that are coming to you, and how are they finding you?
Mm. So I'm finding that Vivify is resonating particularly with, I'd say, three types of people that sometimes are all the same person. One is folks who work in some sort of climate focused, ecological restoration focused, some profession where they're involved in trying to do work to help us be in better relationship with the natural world, but are sitting behind a screen all the time. Because I think a lot of us, a lot of us that started doing this work got into this work because we had a really powerful experience in nature as a kid, because we have this deep sense of like responsibility as humans, as part of the human species, to be more responsible towards the rest of the species on this planet. And we love being outside. And then because so much of our modern economy involves like doing what you and I are doing right now, sitting behind a screen, they start to feel really frustrated. And Vivify is really designed to help support finding a pathway towards like, it doesn't have to be quitting your job. I've worked with a bunch of climate focused folks who, through our work of connecting more deeply with the natural world, they were able to find a way to commit to the work that they were doing with more energy and clarity, because it's work that needs doing.
Mhm.
So I'd say climate and nature professionals is one. Another group is folks who I call them like adventurous spirits, or essentially folks who had a really strong experience with the natural world when they were younger and now are really like yearning to get back to that. I talk to so many people. It's very interesting having these conversations because I talk to so many people who like either later in high school or their freshman year of college went on some like orientation trip or graduation trip that was like backpacking oriented, and they were like, "Yeah, that was so powerful." And then I just never had the opportunity to do it again. And so
Mhm.
there is this sense, I think, for a lot of people of like remembering what it was like to move through the wilderness with a group like that, move through the wilderness with a pack.
Mhm.
But then they're like, yeah, I'm missing that connection now. So that's a second group. And then a third group is really people who are in transition. One thing that I've consistently found is that spending extended time in the natural world and ideally having support for integrating that experience on the front end and back end is the best thing that I've seen for helping to find clarity
Mhm.
about what we really want, who we really are, and how we want to walk through our life. And that's worked for me and it's worked for many people in my life and clients of mine. And so Vivify is also, yeah, really well designed for folks who are in a period of transition.
Okay. As a transition coach myself, and I don't know if any of my employer will be listening to this episode, but I actually like your approach much better. I think, well, I think it opens up a lot of doors without necessarily trying to solve what's going on in your life by researching and being on a computer, because you get to be out in nature and talk about it. And we all, it's just coach, we have the wherewithal to address and resolve issues that we're facing. And so it's
Yeah,
as a
I
in
love to
transition, it's
Yeah,
pretty
I can just
cool.
offer something here. I love to really try to draw a distinction between the questions why, what, and how.
Right.
And I think those questions are best answered from different lenses.
Mhm.
And I think when we're in transition, we're often first asking ourselves the question of why and what before we get to how. I think why and what are better answered by the body, by being in wild places, by like allowing ourselves the space to slow down if we have the privilege to do that.
Mhm.
And I think the answer of how still needs to be coming from like the full body. But I think that's where sort of our rational brain yeah, sometimes you got to like sit down at the computer and do some research or like write something, and that's I think where that really comes into play.
I love it. When your clients amongst these 3 groups come to you, discover you, and discover the website Vivify, how is your program structured, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a 3-month program starting the week of May 6th. And then 2/3 of the way through the program is a week-long backpacking trip in the High Sierra of California. And throughout the program, there's 3 different styles of coaching that we use that are all really complementary. One is group coaching. So we have every other week, the group comes together for an hour and a half and we dive into the curriculum, support each other, do practices. all that. Then there's individual coaching, which is one-on-one coaching with me throughout the program. And then there's also peer coaching where I set folks up one-on-one with someone else in the program, provide the structure for those calls, and it's really a space for those two folks to get more practice with the concepts that we're working with, and also get practice supporting other people, which I think is really powerful too. So, and then the program ends the week of August 20th. And then there's some integration pieces after that. But um, yeah, that's the overall program structure.
And this week out in the Sierras, 14,000 feet. Um, I know I'm not ready for that. How do, are are the folks that are in this program? Are they person on the street again within your three categories, or are they outdoor enthusiasts themselves? Or I mean, what does that composition look like?
Yeah. So generally, in terms of like physical orientation, folks in the program are between 25 and 45,
Hmm.
and are often like not. You don't need to be. You don't need to be an experienced backpacker. You don't need to be super fit. You should be able to like go for a 4 or 5 hour hike on like a moderately hilly terrain, no problem. But part of the reason that Vivify is structured the way that it is to give us a little bit of time to do a little bit of physical training also. So I have done a lot of work with folks on their like first ever backpacking trip. The Sierras are incredibly friendly for backpacking other than the elevation. That's definitely the
Hmm.
hardest part of it,
Yeah.
because it's really hard to go anywhere in the Sierras that's not above 10,000 feet. And so there's ways that we can manage that, but certainly like you should be able to go for a right now, sort of go for a 4 or 5 mile hike without too much trouble. And then we can work up to like what does it look like to carry a backpack from there. But I mean, I've guided dozens of people, maybe hundreds on their like first ever backpacking trip at this point. And I've
Hmm.
seen people from all walks of life without any backpacking experience do incredibly well. And so I think it is accessible to many people and not everyone because some people have various physical limitations or nagging injuries. So I think what I'd say is like if you're curious at all, let's have a conversation. And I'm happy to be support in determining if this is the right thing for you, but definitely not only looking for like ripping mountain athletes for this program.
Okay, fair enough. So there's a possibility here. You just mentioned the word a bit about being able to get out on this trail, and an area that I oftentimes will uh, chat about during the podcast is about access, and
Mm,
especially access to folks who have some sort of disability. Just curious, because I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up, given the nature of this podcast. What experiences have you had with a client that perhaps had a physical uh, disability or something that made it a little bit more difficult than so your somebody like you or somebody like me?
mhm. Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I can say is I'm actually currently working with a client one on one right now who was interested in Vivify. We had a conversation and we both decided like probably the wilderness expedition would have been more than she could handle this year.
Okay.
But she was like, I really resonate with the program. I really like the work that you do. And so now we're working together one on one in sort of a separate coaching arrangement. And that's been super powerful because I've been able to like tailor the work specifically to her and where she's at. And part of the work that we do together is like finding ways for her to get out into the wilderness near where she lives in ways
Mhm.
that are accessible for her, and then giving her like practices and some of the things that we do on the wilderness trip within Vivify. I'm just like supporting her to do right where she lives. So that's a way that someone that maybe isn't ready to go up into the Sierras for a week, can still be able to interact with this work and continue to get engaged. Yeah.
Okay. You have mentioned the word immersion a number of times, and I love it because again, I sit literally at my desk every day. Okay, if I'm not coaching or podcasting, I'm probably sleeping, so I'm horizontal. Getting outside is so very important to our physical, emotional, spiritual well-being, mental well-being. what have you found has been the challenge with your clients and through your coaching to get people to lean into that, perhaps that unknown, the discomfort, but really to begin to embrace, I need to be outside and immerse myself in nature because it's important and I need to do it for my well-being. What have been some of the challenges you have faced with your clients uh that dilemma?
I mean, I'd say the main one is I don't have time.
Okay.
I think experience in the natural world is something I've met a few people that will say, like, "I just don't like it." I've met more people who are like, "Yeah, I love it whenever I make time to do it, but life's so busy." And I think especially when you start getting into folks who have kids or even folks who have pets, yeah, it becomes more challenging. It's like it's harder to get out into the wilderness. And so I think there's ways to navigate this. I mean, one thing that I talk about a lot, which I think is relevant here, is this thing called the nature pyramid, which I first read about in Michael Easter's work, who wrote The Comfort Crisis, but he got it from a neuroscientist at MIT. I think her name is Rachel Hopman. Anyways, the nature pyramid is essentially these three thresholds at which something meaningful happens in our psychology and in our physiology that contribute positively to our health. So the first threshold is actually only 20 minutes. So if you go for a 20-minute walk in a city park near you, like not it doesn't need to be wilderness, but like a green place, and you leave your phone at home, after those 20 minutes, they can noticeably measure like an expansion in your perspective, a relaxation in your stress hormones, like a straightening in your posture. There's all these positive things that happen if you go for a 20-minute walk. Most people can figure out a way to go for a 20-minute walk 3 or 4 times a week. Bring your dog. I recognize people have busy lives, but like this is accessible. And then the next threshold is 5 hours, which they suggest to try to do once a month at minimum. But
Mhm.
after 5 hours, you start to like really get a little bit more separation from your day to day life. Your heart rate slows. I mean, unless you're working hard, but essentially you are like able to drop a little bit more into the rhythm of the natural world rather than the like sort of fast paced rhythm that we're often in when we're doing more technology focused work, when we're like flitting from thing to thing on a computer.
Mhm.
And then the final threshold is 3 days. Now, this is the one that I'm most interested in because when I was working for Outward Bound instructors would talk about this all the time. Like things were a little weird until day 3, and then the group really dropped in together. There's something powerful that happens when we're out in the wilderness for at least 3 days. And they suggest within the nature pyramid that you should do that once a year. I would say more is more on that one. But if you can get out in the wilderness for 3 days once a year, I mean, it's so powerful to get that level of space and exposure to the environment that we evolved in. And this is something that I think is really important to highlight too, is like right now, you and I sitting on this screen talking to each other. I'm like thrilled to be having this conversation, but we're like incredibly overstimulated in one way, which is like visually and maybe verbally, and incredibly understimulated in so many other ways in terms of like the complexity of the sounds that we would be hearing or the feeling of the wind on our skin or the feeling of the earth under our feet. And the human body evolved in these wild and natural environments. And so when we can spend 3 or more days in those places, we start to have this sense of like homecoming and this sense of belonging and this sense of like, I'm an animal. We're all animals walking on this earth. And so whenever I can get out for more than 3 days, it's absolutely transcendental. And but it's hard. It's longer than a long weekend. So it's you have to really try in this modern world to get out for that long.
Is your program, this 3-month program, is it one 3-month program, or do you have every quarter, or is it just once a year?
So I'm fully focused on this is the first cohort of Vivify
Yeah,
launching May 6th. I
very
certainly
exciting.
intend I certainly intend to run many more future cohorts, but nothing on the calendar right now.
Okay. And the clients that you've worked with, so this game, obviously we can't speak to the first cohort, but the ones that you have been essentially creating the framework for, what has been their reaction to this experience of being out there and just sitting down on the rock, the log, looking at the pristine waters up in the Sierras, those high glacial lakes, and what's been their experience, and what have they shared with you?
Yeah, and worth saying that while this is the first cohort of Vivify with this particular structure, I mean, I've been guiding wilderness trips for
Right.
5 or 6 years now, and I've been coaching for 3, so none of the components of Vivify are new. This is just the first package in this
The
particular
assembly,
way.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I can speak to some experiences that I've seen of folks on wilderness trips, and um, I often find that there is, on an individual level, there's a real ability to like slow down, and it's like a physical widening of our peripheral vision. And I often hear people say something like, "Wow, I feel like I'm breathing fully for the first time in a while,"
Mm,
or like, "Wow, I feel like I'm, capable of so much more than I thought I was capable of," especially folks who had never been backpacking before, like finding out, "Oh, I'm actually capable of carrying everything I need on my back for 6 days and actually enjoying it, not just like surviving it." Um, so there's that on the individual level. The other thing is on the community level, there is this amazing alchemy that happens when you're with a group of like 10 or 12 people out in the wilderness for a week, because there's no external influence. So everyone's just either alone or in some flavor of togetherness,
mhm,
and you're immersed in the physical world. Like you're cooking together, you're putting up the tent together. It's this return to like how humans evolved, moving across the landscape as a pack. And I remember particularly this one trip that I guided in Alaska probably 3 years ago, where we just had the worst weather ever. It rained for a week straight. It was 45 degrees and raining in August. And, we were, like, scrambling to put up the tarp every night so we could cook under it, and everyone was wet all the time. Some of the days it was, like, howling wind. A bunch of people, it was their first time backpacking ever. And I have this video of, like, day 5, I think, and we're all under the tarps. It's just absolutely nuking rain, and we are racking up, like, having the best time of our lives. And there's a saying within Knowles and Outward Bound instructors that, like, bad weather makes great courses.
mhm.
And there's a really powerful coming together within community that happens that I think is really, really difficult to replicate in our modern world, where there's A, so many distractions, and B, so many options for where people are going to spend their time, and people are like juggling so many different things. So there's a really powerful like reclamation and deepening of community that happens also. Yeah, and I'll pause there.
As you look forward to this first cohort going out again and acknowledging the experience that you have that has informed it, what what would be the one or two aha moments that you are hoping for in this tra- transformation uh, for your clientele that you're going to take out?
I think a lot of us spend a lot of time asking the question, why am I here, or where do I belong, or what should I do? And the most powerful thing that I've experienced in the last 3 years has been shifting my context of belonging from situated in like our human world, which is often something like, who's my community? What's my vocation? How do I explain myself? Shifting that locus of belonging into foundationally identifying as like part of the family of life on earth,
Mm,
and rooting that belonging in the earth and in the more than human world. And that will always hold you. And so it's this deep level of uh kind of like existential safety,
mhm,
and like expanding your context of what the world is, so that you are always already home. And then you get to play from there.
mhm.
Then you get to play into like, cool, what is the way that I want to offer my gifts into the world, rather than like grasping for a place to belong. Um, I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen for everyone on Vivify, but that's the most powerful thing that's happened for me. And if I can like support with a couple nudges or steps in that direction, that would feel like good work.
Very good. One last question with regard to this cohort or any of your other uh, the the excursions you've taken your clients on is how do you envision after the program ends, say like on August 20th, to help maintain that energy, that desire to want to continue to go down this path and nurture it?
It's a phenomenal point, and it's a great question. So I really put a lot of intention into how we integrate within Vivify because this is something that I've actually felt has been missing a lot from a lot of the wilderness trips that I've guided to this point in my career. So the wilderness trip is July 20th through 28th. We end about a month later. And then a month after that, we have another series of one group coaching session, one individual coaching session, and one peer coaching session. And these are specifically focused on integration. And they come at a time when like the learnings and everything we experienced within Vivify is still fresh, but we're far enough out that probably a new set of challenges has emerged in people's lives for them to apply that to. So there we have specific integration sessions after the program. And I've learned from the Animas Valley Institute the power of this particular structure of an online community or an online council
Mhm.
that's essentially an email thread where each member every 2 weeks has the opportunity to write like a longer form share to the group. And then everyone responds to them either individually or to the entire group. And I find this is a great format to be able to do this in because it removes like sort of I don't know if you have this experience, but I have like many group WhatsApp threads that it's a little bit hard to keep track of. So it removes that need of this just being like another sort of group text that it's difficult to keep track of. But it allows us to like continue to share the experiences that each of us are having with the group with a level of depth and a level of consistency that sort of maintains the support of the container. Yeah, so that's how I approach integration.
Very good. Before we head out today, Dom, any final thoughts or insights you would offer to the community? And I can see many in my listening community who would be very interested in this kind of an experience, both as a someone who sits around at a desk and does work, as a writer, an outdoor journalist, and someone who just has in their mind, I need something different in my life. This what I'm doing is not enough. Any final thoughts to them for why this program is something that should be at least explored, discovered, considered?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is we have many miracles in the modern world, and I think the world that we've set up for ourselves is not necessarily super conducive to human thriving. I think a lot of us are very distracted, pretty overwhelmed, and we're also domesticated.
Mm,
You know,
very much.
we sit inside boxes and stare at screens and so the Vivify is really designed as like a pathway towards thriving in the context of all the challenges of the modern world, be those personal or collective, through remembering foundationally what we are. We are human animals, just another species on this planet. And the more that we can rest in that and then ask ourselves the question of like, what does a good life look like from that context? I think that's the path towards living a life our grandchildren would be proud of.
Fantastic. Actually, speaking of grandchildren to be proud of, your team, and I know you have a team because I was on your website. Talk a little bit about them because they help make this happen.
Yeah, so I have some awesome members that are supporting Vivify. So my co-guide on the wilderness expedition is Nadine Lenner. I've worked with Nadine a ton in Patagonia. She is just a total badass outdoors woman. She graduated from the Stanford Business School, worked really closely with the Tompkins Foundation, doing a ton of amazing conservation work. in Patagonia and now runs Chulengo Expeditions, which is a conservation focused adventure company running trips in the Aysén region of Chile. So I've
Mhm.
guided with her a ton. She also is just like personally a total badass. I mean, right before she comes to guide Vivify, she'll just have led an all female expedition on Denali, which is the tallest mountain in North America.
Mhm.
And yeah, so she's an incredible guide. She's been guiding for Knowles for 2 decades, and really excited to work with her. And then we also have Gigi Falk, who is an amazing meditation instructor. She's sat over 6,000 hours of silent meditation retreat and has also run a meditation focused company for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years. And so she'll be supporting every member with Vivify with their meditation practice. Because I really think being able to have at least some level of a consistent meditation practice is really powerful for helping us do anything that we want to do in our lives well. Gigi's also my partner, so it'll be really cool to be collaborating with her on Vivify.
Excellent. Excellent. And speaking of Vivify, if our listeners would like to learn more about it, learn about you, your team, the program, where are the best places for them to go?
So vivify.life is the website, and Vivify is spelled Vivify. The word means to bring to life. And so if Vivify is nothing else but a good shake and a good shot of aliveness, then that'll be a success. And yeah, you can find me on Substack. Dom Francks and Integrated Wildness is the name of my Substack newsletter. And then you can find me on any of the social media channels. I'm Dom Francks anywhere, either all one word or just search that name and you'll be able to find me.
Very good. Well, we'll provide the backlinks to the website, the Substack site, as well as the social sites. Donna, it's been a pleasure. I am so glad I signed into Podmatch. They'll Podmatch will be happy I signed into Podmatch. And but this, I mean, this episode, as I had shared early on, is a great confluence between the worlds of coaching and consulting, where I came from, coaching that I'm in today, but also my interest in the outdoor space and the stories of people who are making a difference. So this was definitely a bullseye or a home run, or we've caught the big one. So thank you for spending time with us today, and what you provided and shared with our listeners was definitely gold, and we're very grateful for that. So thank you so much.
Thanks a ton, Howard. I really appreciate it. Really just a joy to be on with you today.
Perfect. Listen, stay in the line. We're going to do a very quick close, and you and I can have a final chat. Okay.
Beautiful.
All right, folks. We've just been chatting with Dom Francks, wilderness guide and leadership coach. He is the founder of Vivify, a wilderness based coaching program built around uh, a week-long backpacking trip. But before that, there's coaching activity that goes in to help prepare the way, prepare that path for this wilderness adventure. And what I really love is even after the adventure is over, the learning, the transformation, the insights continue. And we can do a lot of things as individuals, but doing things as groups, as teams, and building friendships is so very powerful. And I'm really excited too about learning more about the nature pyramid. And I'm actually kind of glad I took up disc golf, because that's my reason for getting out of the house right after this podcast is over. But in any case, we really appreciate Dom taking time out of his very busy day to join us here on the Outdoor Adventure Series. Now, if you'd like to hear this episode, you can find us on outdooradventureseries.com. We also have our LinkedIn and Facebook pages. We are on YouTube, the audio version, and we're also going to create a video version of segments of this episode, which we will also have on YouTube. And of course, you can find us on all the podcast directories. Just do a search for Outdoor Adventure Series. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. And we look forward to having you on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.